Thanks for joining us for CBN NewsWatch. I'm Heather Sells.
And I'm Ephraim Graham. A crowded Amtrak train going from Washington, D.C. to New York City crashed, overturning in Philadelphia overnight. Authorities say at least 5 people are dead and dozens more injured when train cars flew off the rails going around a turn. Caitlin Burke has more.
It's one of the most common train routes, Washington, D.C. to New York City. Authorities say the train involved in last night's Amtrak crash was carrying 238 passengers and 5 employees. The National Transportation Safety Board is sending a team to the crash site to investigate what went wrong. Passengers say everything seemed normal until the horrific moment when the train jumped the tracks.
Basically, the train tilted over and rolled.
Suddenly, the car just got tossed, and then there's just kind of a moment of chaos where, like, people and things are kind of, all kind of tumbling around you. The car's dark.
Philadelphia's Mayor Michael Nutter spoke at the crash site, calling the scene unbelievable.
It is an absolute disastrous mess. Never seen anything like this in my life.
The Federal Railroad Administration reports that the engine of the train and 2 cars were upright. 3 are mangled and lying on their sides, and 1 is nearly on its roof and leaning drastically. Former Pennsylvania Congressman Patrick Murphy was on the train. He said he heard a bang and then felt everything begin to shake.
Human nature kicks in, so there was people who they didn't care about anyone else. They were getting off that train, so stepping over people. The guy next to me was unconscious, so I kind of slapped him a little bit and got him up, and then he was, believe it or not, okay.
Amtrak announced late Tuesday that it's canceling all traffic between New York and Philadelphia for the time being, one of the most heavily traveled areas in the nation. Caitlin Burke, CBN News.
Operation Blessing is on the ground in Van, Texas, helping the community there recover after the deadly EF3 tornado that ripped through it Sunday night. At least 2 people died and about a dozen others were injured. Approximately 30% of the city suffered damages. Some homes were completely destroyed.
We've been asked by emergency management to coordinate volunteers to help these residents clean up their homes. We're here to show the love of God in a tangible way by putting tarps on roofs and bringing the debris to the curb.
On Tuesday, everyone, including residents, had to leave the affected area due to a gas leak. The leak has been repaired, and Operation Blessing is now training and sending volunteers to help the community.
Officials in Nepal are ordering people out of damaged buildings. The order comes after that second quake on Tuesday killed at least 65 people and injured more than 2,000. Casualties were low because most people are still living outside after the April 25th quake that killed more than 8,000 people. The latest quake set off landslides, blocking relief aid for victims of that earlier quake. Meanwhile, the search continues for a missing U.S. Marine helicopter. It disappeared while delivering disaster aid to the Northeast. 6 Marines and 2 Nepalese soldiers were on board that plane.
In the aftermath of that earthquake, one of the biggest needs is clean drinking water. So CBN's Operation Blessing came up with a creative way to solve that problem.
Life has become extremely difficult for many survivors of Nepal's earthquake. After losing everything, the displaced victims now face a new danger: dirty water. Living in makeshift camps with little access to hygiene, sanitation, and clean water, the threat of sickness is very real. But weaving through the destruction of this town are 2 members of the Operation Blessing team with an innovative solution to the water problem. The OB Safe Water teams use motorcycles to access communities and distribute liquid chlorine, a disinfectant solution to purify water and make it completely safe for drinking. This highly effective liquid chlorine was manufactured by the Operation Blessing team right in Nepal.
We're in Nepal's capital city, Kathmandu, where Operation Blessing has installed 2 machines capable of producing 220 gallons of liquid chlorine every single day, that when added to water, completely disinfects it and makes it 100% safe to drink.
The Operation Blessing teams use the chlorine in a variety of ways. Some is added directly to water containers at access points, some is mixed into large water tanks, and some solution is given directly to families along with training and instructions on proper use. 26-year-old Indu told us that she and her 2 children were sick from a stomach illness. We were hearing the same from others all over this camp. The Operation Blessing Safe Water teams are delivering this strategic assistance at the most critical of times.
From here, we're going to be distributing liquid chlorine all over the city. Working with our local partner, we have a great distribution network where we can get this chlorine out into the field and into the hands of the people that really need it.
Thanks to Operation Blessing's chlorine technology and safe water teams, this cup of water is safe to drink, and thousands of Nepalese will be protected from sickness as they slowly recover from the disaster.
And you can learn more about all the creative ways that Operation Blessing is helping by logging on to ob.org.
Another attack on a religious minority in Pakistan. Gunmen killed more than 40 people in Karachi Wednesday. They were aboard a bus bound for a community center for Islamic Shiite Muslims. A security guard at a nearby building said he heard the gunshots and saw the militants driving away. A faction of the Pakistani Taliban called the Army of God claimed responsibility for the attack. This is the deadliest incident in Pakistan since December, when Taliban militants killed 150 people at an army-run school in Peshawar.
A jury begins deliberating the fate of Boston Marathon bomber Dzhokhar Tsarnaev today. Prosecutors and defense attorneys will make their final arguments this morning. Tsarnaev's attorneys say the 19-year-old should get life in prison. They argue he was led astray by his radicalized older brother. Prosecutors contend he is a terrorist who helped plan and carry out a vicious attack that killed 3 people. They say his actions merit the death penalty.
Babies born extremely premature, as early as 22 weeks, often survive with medical intervention. That's according to a new study in the New England Journal of Medicine. The study showed that 22-week-old babies who receive active treatment from hospitals had a 23% chance of surviving versus babies who receive so-called comfort care. For babies born 1 week later at 23 weeks, their survival rate jumped to 33% with active treatment. The study concluded hospital actions have a dramatic influence on whether infants born almost 4 months premature can live. Many hospitals don't try to help those babies survive.
States across the country have been passing pro-life bills in recent years, but that hasn't been the case in Washington. Now, a new bill that would ban almost all abortions after 5 months is before Congress. Paul Strand brings us that story.
Last week, pro-life leaders protested at House Speaker John Boehner's office for a second time. They're furious congressional Republicans haven't been bringing pro-life bills up for votes.
These abortion opponents are still mad at what U.S. House leaders did just hours before the January 22nd March for Life.
In a surprise reversal, they abandoned the plan to vote on a law banning abortion for unborn babies this size and this well-developed.
Tragically, on the Roe v. Wade memorial, they pulled legislation which would ban abortions after 20 weeks. That's not just a betrayal of the pro-life movement, that's a betrayal of these innocent children.
The protesters say nearly 4 months of inaction has been inexcusable, especially when 60% of Americans want some abortions limited. Pro-life activist Mallory Quigley says that's especially true of the 20-week abortion ban.
There's been more than 5 major national polls that all show that Americans agree with us on this point. It's time to remove the United States from the list of only 7 countries to allow abortion after this point in time.
So there's relief at news the House will vote on the measure this week.
The pro-life movement is definitely on the move throughout the country. In fact, state legislatures have passed hundreds of anti-abortion bills.
But at least until now, Washington politicians have been slow to act.
And we're saying, come on, Congress, act on the promises that you made to America's children.
Sometimes the details can get in the way.
Illinois Congressman Randy Hultgren backs the legislation and blames delays on last-second reservations of some supporters.
When it is presented or how it's presented, there can be disagreement. So it's not a disagreement over the ideas or what we're doing, but it's more a strategy of how we're doing it.
So activists say voters have to keep phoning and emailing their pro-life lawmakers to make sure they act.
Because they cannot ever forget that this is a defining issue for many, many Americans and that we want to see a change.
Reverend Mahoney has seen this type of obstacle all too often.
I think within the pro-life community, we've come to refer ourselves as the Rodney Dangerfield of social movements. We get no respect.
He's hoping to reverse that by taking action like the Capitol Hill protests.
We walked precincts, we made phone calls, we dropped tons of literature, we gave millions of dollars to Republican candidates. And tragically, look what happens. We get completely betrayed. You ignore us, you make a promise and then break it.
In the case of the 20-week abortion ban, GOP Representatives Renee Elmers, Jackie Walorski, and Charlie Dent derailed it. Elmers and Walorski complained the bill would force rape victims wanting an abortion after 5 months to have reported the rape. And Dent was worried about voting on a contentious social issue that could upset women and young voters. They talked enough other Republicans into opposing the ban, Speaker Boehner and fellow leaders felt they no longer had the votes to pass it.
There still is a strong number of people who see that as important.
Mahoney points out numbers that should matter to politicians, the 2014 election results.
Every incumbent who lost was pro-choice. Not one pro-life incumbent lost.
He says Republicans voting pro-life isn't just moral, it's smart politics.
It's protecting their power base in the House. It's actually ensuring that they will win. And for Democrats, studies show 90% of all pro-life Democrats win.
Hultgren pleads for abortion opponents to give Congress and its frustratingly slow deliberative process more time.
Bad things can happen very quickly here. Good things often take a long time, but it's worth it. We need to persevere.
Paul Strand, CBN News, Capitol Hill.
And the House of Representatives finally voting on that pro-life fetal pain bill today. House Majority Leader Kevin McCarthy telling CBN News that supporting it simply makes sense because the child inside the womb feels pain after 20 weeks. CBN's David Brody spoke one-on-one with McCarthy about the bill.
There are a lot of pro-choicers, so to speak, that are concerned about this bill going too far. What is your response to that?
Well, I think anybody, no matter where they are on this issue, when it comes to after 20 weeks, studies have shown they feel the pain. It just, why would you do a late term? The child is viable. I think there's an opportunity here for everybody to support the bill, to be able to move forward.
While the House is supporting the pro-life bill, it is not clear if the Senate will take it up, and President Obama is expected to veto it.
New York Governor Andrew Cuomo is proposing steps to offer more school choice for parents. He wants tax credits of up to $500 for low-income families who send their children to private schools. Cuomo also wants the state to offer tax credits for private donations to public schools and scholarships for students from low and middle income families who attend either private schools or public schools outside of their local district.
Although America is one of the richest nations in the world, 1 in 5 American children live below the poverty line. Catholic and evangelical policy influencers joined President Obama in a poverty summit in Washington Tuesday. Their goal is to find a place of common agreement between conservative and progressive lawmakers that will benefit the least of these.
They will find, like, folks who make me mad. I don't know where they find them, right? They're all like, I don't want to work. I just want a free Obama phone or whatever. And that becomes an entire narrative.
Can you believe he said Obama phone? And he's against the Obama phone.
President Obama says his Christian beliefs tell him it is important to mentor young people and make charitable donations. But he also wants to influence policy that can reduce poverty in America.
Coming up, losing their faith, why fewer Americans are now calling themselves Christians. The number of Americans who are not affiliated with any particular religion is on the rise.
And the number of people who call themselves Christians is falling. Those are the findings of a new Pew Research poll. Just under 71% of Americans called themselves Christians in 2014, compared to 78% in 2007. 23% identified themselves as atheist, agnostic, or of no particular faith last year, compared to only 16% in 2007. Researchers say the drop in the number of Christians is driven by declines in mainline or liberal Protestant and Catholic churches.
Well, for more on this, I spoke with Ben Connolly. He's the co-author of a field guide for everyday missions. And I asked him if he thinks the drop in church affiliation is due to Christians not effectively sharing their faith.
I think that across history we've seen in our faith this tension between what we know to be true, that God calls all of his people to fulfill the Great Commission, and just the tension between that and the fact that it's hard. It's difficult to approach our neighbors with something that we might think is offensive to them or might, push too closely to personal boundaries or that kind of thing.
Why do you think that is? Why don't we have deeper friendships with unbelievers?
Yeah, it seems as though we kind of put people in two different categories. And so with our Christian friends, we put them over here, and we feel like we can be real with them. We feel like we can talk about things naturally. We don't have to be guarded or that kind of thing. And so we have real relationships, to use the term you just did, with Christian friends. But then we have this whole other camp of folks who aren't Christians, and even to term them friends for many of us would be difficult. Very likely, whether we would use this term or not, those in kind of that category, our view of them is more that like they're projects. They're someone that we're sent to with one goal, and so the relational component often gets lost, and instead they are just simply a target for us, or we use terms like investment and that kind of thing. And even that language, in any other part of the world, if we invest, we expect a return, and if we don't get a return, we pull out of the investment and invest somewhere else. And so we just don't even use the same language between our Christian friends and folks who aren't yet believers in our lives.
What I'm wondering is, so I do see that tendency. I understand what you're saying when you say that sometimes you see a non-believer friendship as a project. How do you get out of that mindset? What do you think is the right way to approach those relationships?
Yeah, I think the best way is just to simply realize that every one of us was in that position at one point in our lives. And so whether God redeemed us when we were 8 years old or 78 years old, we were a human made in the image of God. And so there's a lot that we have to relate on outside of specific conversations about faith. And so to start to see our point of connection more by the fact that we have a shared humanity, we have a shared creator, very likely we have a shared culture, we have shared interests, I think we can forget these truths. And so we can forget that 90% of the stuff that we talk about with this group, with our Christian friends, we can talk about the same things with our friends who don't yet believe.
So Ben Connolly, thank you so much for joining us today.
You bet, my pleasure. I hope that our brief time was fruitful for you and your viewers.
Thank you, Ben.
Up next, making the deserts bloom, how Israel is turning dry wasteland into farmland, just like the Bible predicted.
Their land is mostly desert, but that doesn't stop Israel's farmers from making the desert bloom.
As Chris Mitchell shows us, Israel's farmers are constantly developing new ways to grow better produce and to bring in bigger harvests.
Farming in the desert is about battling the elements. A harsh climate, little water, and poor soil.
We are not the first, but maybe one of the first nations ever who really found the way to cultivate the desert and make it bloom.
When many Jewish people returned to the Promised Land in the 1800s, the land was dry and barren. Today, more than half of Israel is still desert. But just like the Bible says, Israelis have found unique ways to make the desert bloom and prosper. This is Moshav Hatzeva in the central Arava Desert. Located along the Jordanian border, this area gets about an inch of rain a year. And believe it or not, local farmers use that to their advantage.
From here to Europe, the distance is so short. It's a so natural market for Israel. We are here ahead of everybody because of the weather.
Despite the conditions, 500 farming families here produce 60% of Israel's fresh vegetable exports and 10% of its cut flour market.
We grow summer crops during the winter time.
Mayan Kidron oversees flour research that helps find alternative crops to improve the farmer's harvest in the Arava.
We've got a new ideas, a new production, a new products that we have. For example, this small round pepper, we call it Tweety. That's the name of the variety, Tweety. Round pepper, that's another option for the farmers to grow.
Each year, hundreds of people in the agriculture business visit a giant exhibition at Moshav Hatzeva to learn about experiments and technology. Entrepreneur Boaz Wachtel hopes to improve plant growth by regulating root temperature.
Each plant has an optimal temperature that it performs in that range.
Water pipes run along the roots, bringing cool water in summer and warmer water in winter.
When you keep that root at that certain range and you prevent the fluctuations of day and night temperature in summer and winter, then the plant performs wonderfully and it produces more yield and a better quality, and the cycle is also shorter.
Wachtel says he's seen great success.
We produced 120% more cucumbers. We had lettuce, 35% more weight. We had basil, 30% more. We had tomatoes that is usually planted in October. We planted them during the middle of the summer.
Alon Badihi is executive director of the Jewish National Fund. JNF has developed and forested the land of Israel for more than 100 years. He says it's the special commitment of these Israelis to the Arava that's making the land prosper.
Without this spirit and without this belief and without this creation and innovation in agriculture, in science, in what we see in the laboratory we just established together here in the Arava for the people of the Arava, it would never happen.
Chris Mitchell, CBN News, the Arava Desert.
And finally, a word for your Wednesday. Today's word is committed, and it takes commitment to see things through to completion, especially when others don't share your vision or your faith for that matter. So when things get tough for any number of reasons, remember this: God does not call us to be comfortable. He calls us to be committed. And with that, he promises to be faithful. And his commitment to us is what brought Jesus all the way to the cross. And we know that that was far from comfortable.
That's right. That is it for now on CBN NewsWatch. You can find more of our exclusive coverage of the issues that you care most about at cbnnews.com.
Take the time to tell us what you think about the stories you've seen here today. You can do that on Facebook or at CBN News on Twitter. Hope you'll join us again right here next time. Make this a wonderful Wednesday, everybody.